Borrowers under the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program may be eligible for forgiveness of their Paycheck Protection Program loans if certain criteria are met. This video provides instructions for completing the Paycheck Protection Program Loan Forgiveness Application Form 3508EZ. The Paycheck Protection Program will be referred to as PPP throughout this video. Form 3508EZ is only available to borrowers that meet certain criteria. A borrower can use this form if it fits into one of three categories. Before we identify and discuss these categories, we'll cover some basic terms and definitions of the program. The term covered period refers to the period of time borrowers have to use their PPP loans. That is either the 24-week period beginning on the date that the borrower's PPP loan is disbursed, or if the borrower received a PPP loan before June 5, 2020, then the borrower may choose to use the 8-week period beginning on the date its PPP loan was disbursed, as opposed to 24 weeks. The term alternative payroll covered period refers to the alternative time period a borrower may choose to calculate payroll costs eligible for loan forgiveness. A borrower with a biweekly or more frequent payroll schedule may choose the 24-week period that begins on the first day of the first pay period following the loan disbursement date. For borrowers that receive PPP loans before June 5, 2020, those borrowers may choose the 8 or 24-week period that begins on the first day of the first pay period after the loan disbursement date. Now let's go over the three categories of borrowers that may use the Form 3508EZ to apply for loan forgiveness. First, a borrower can use Form 3508EZ if the borrower is a self-employed individual, independent contractor, or sole proprietor, and the borrower had no employees at the time of its PPP loan application, and the borrower's PPP loan application form calculations did not include any employees' salaries. Second, a borrower can use Form 3508EZ if the borrower did not reduce any employee's annual salary or hourly wages by more than 25% during the covered period or alternative payroll covered period as compared to the period between January 1, 2020 and March 31, 2020, and the borrower did not reduce the number of employees or the average paid hours of employees between January 1, 2020 and the end of the covered period. Note that for these purposes, borrowers can ignore reductions of employees who were previously employed on February 15, 2020 and not rehired if the borrower was unable to hire similarly qualified employees for the unfilled positions on or before December 31, 2020. Borrowers can also ignore reductions in an employee's hours that the borrower offered to restore and the employee refused. Third, a borrower can use Form 3508EZ if the borrower did not reduce any employee's annual salary or hourly wages by more than 25% during the covered period or alternative payroll covered period as compared to the period between January 1, 2020 and March 31, 2020. And the borrower was unable to operate between February 15, 2020 and the end of the 24-week period following loan disbursement, or if the borrower chooses, the end of the 8-week period, at the same level of business activity as before February 15, 2020 due to compliance with federal requirements or guidance issued between March 1, 2020 and December 31, 2020 related to standards of sanitation or distancing or any other work or customer safety requirement related to COVID-19. If a borrower fits into any one of these three categories, then it may proceed with completing Form 3508EZ. If a borrower does not fit into one of these three categories, then it must apply for loan forgiveness using the longer SBA Form 3508. The borrower should complete the biographical and business information at the top of the form. The information provided for the business legal name, business address, and contact information should match the information on the borrower's PPP loan application form, referred to as SBA Form 2483. If there has been a change in the contact information, the updated information should be included on the application. Provide the SBA and lender PPP loan numbers. For the PPP loan disbursement date, the borrower should enter the date it received PPP loan proceeds from its lender. If it received the loan in multiple disbursements, then use the date of the first disbursement. The borrower should identify the number of employees at the time of its submitted PPP loan application, and separately, the number of employees at the time the Form 3508EZ is submitted. This information is requested to determine if any reductions to loan forgiveness will apply. If applicable, provide information on any economic injury disaster loan that the borrower received. Select the borrower's payroll schedule, regardless of whether the borrower intends to use the alternative payroll covered period. As noted before, the borrower should indicate here its covered period, start and end dates. Again, the covered period is either the 24 weeks beginning on the date of the loan disbursement, or if the borrower received its PPP loan before June 5, 2020, then the borrower may choose to use the 8 weeks beginning on the date of the loan disbursement as its covered period. The covered period includes the date on which the loan proceeds were disbursed to the borrower. Under no circumstances can the covered period extend beyond December 31, 2020. The borrower can choose whether or not to use an alternative payroll covered period to calculate its payroll costs eligible for loan forgiveness. If the borrower chooses to use this alternative, then the 8 or 24-week period will begin on the first day of the first pay period after the borrower receives its PPP loan proceeds. If a borrower chooses to use the alternative payroll covered period, then it must use this period for the entire application whenever there is a reference to covered period or alternative payroll covered period. If the borrower and its affiliates receive PPP loan amounts in excess of $2 million, then the borrower should check this box. Next, we'll turn to calculating the amount of loan forgiveness. Line 1, payroll costs. The borrower should add up the payroll costs incurred or paid during the covered period or alternative covered period, including cash compensation, employee benefits, and state and local employee taxes paid by the borrower and assessed on employee compensation, such as state unemployment insurance tax. For owner employees, self-employed individuals, including independent contractors, and general partners, the amount of cash compensation that can be included in Line 1 is capped at $20,833 for a 24-week covered period for each individual, or the 2.5-month equivalent of their 2019 compensation, whichever is lower. For an 8-week covered period, the cap is a lower of $15,385, or the 8-week equivalent of their 2019 compensation. These same individuals should not include employer health insurance contributions or employer retirement contributions. For businesses with employees, the total amount of cash compensation to be included in Line 1 should not exceed an annualized salary of $100,000 for any employee. Practically, if the borrower is using an 8-week covered period, then the total cash compensation for each employee cannot exceed $15,385. If the borrower is using a 24-week covered period, then the total for each employee cannot exceed $46,154. The borrower can only include compensation of employees with a principal place of residence in the United States. In addition to this cash compensation, the borrower can add employee benefits to the Line 1 amount. As an example, if a borrower received a PPP loan after June 5, 2020 and is a self-employed individual with no employees and received a gross salary or gross wages of $100,000 in 2019, then on Line 1, that individual would enter $20,833. As a separate example, let's consider a borrower who received a PPP loan before June 5th and elects to keep the 8-week covered period. Let's also assume that the borrower is a self-employed individual with no employees and received a gross salary or gross wages of $100,000 in 2019. This individual can use PPP loan proceeds to pay him or herself up to $15,385 in owner compensation and can include this amount on Line 1. This borrower in the second example may have remaining PPP loan proceeds to use for eligible non-payroll costs, which he or she will capture in lines 2 through 4 below. For lines 2 through 4, the borrower can include non-payroll costs for which it seeks forgiveness, such as business rent or lease payments, business utility payments, and business mortgage interest payments. These payments must be paid or incurred during the covered period and relate to service or lease agreements in force before February 15, 2020. To continue with our first example, if the self-employed borrower elects to use the full PPP loan amount to pay his or herself owner compensation for a 24-week period, which would be a maximum amount of $20,833, then the borrower should enter 0 in lines 2 through 4, as those payroll costs will exhaust the full PPP loan amount. But if the borrower elects not to pay him or herself the full amount of owner compensation for a 24-week period, then the borrower may be able to recover for eligible non-payroll costs and can enter those amounts in lines 2 through 4. For example, assume that our borrower used $15,000 for owner compensation. To the extent the borrower used the remaining $5,000 to pay for business rent, utilities, or mortgage interest, then the borrower can put those amounts into lines 2 through 4. In line 5, the borrower should add up lines 1 through 4 and enter the sum amount. In line 6, for our example, we use $20,833 as the PPP loan amount, as this is the max PPP loan amount for a self-employed borrower with no employees who received a gross salary or wages of $100,000 in 2019. Line 7 is designed to determine whether at least 60% of the costs for which the borrower seeks loan forgiveness are payroll costs. The borrower should divide the amount in line 1, which is payroll costs, by 0.60. For this line, let's consider a third example. A small business borrower with 3 employees that each receive weekly cash compensation and benefits of $1,500 and have received this level of compensation for the past 18 months. During the covered period, this borrower may pay each employee no less than $1,125 a week to stay within the safe harbor for employee wage reductions. If the borrower pays 3 employees $1,125 a week for an 8-week covered period, then the amount on line 1 of the form will be $27,000. The borrower should divide this amount by 0.60 to ensure that at least 60% of the potential forgiveness amount was used on payroll costs. If the amounts on lines 5 or 6 are larger than the amount of line 7, then the amount on line 7 will be the potential loan forgiveness amount. This ensures that at least 6% of loan proceeds are used on payroll costs. For line 8, the borrower should review the amounts listed in lines 5, 6, and 7 and enter the lowest amount. This will be the amount for which loan forgiveness is sought. Finally, the borrower should review the certifications and representations on Form 3508EZ prior to signing the application. Once completed, the borrower should submit Form 3508EZ to the lender servicing its PPP loan. The borrower may choose to also include the demographic information form, but that form is not required. Lenders are required to make a decision within 60 days of receiving the loan forgiveness application. With the application, the borrower must provide certain documentation proving the eligible cash compensation, non-cash benefit payments, and non-payroll costs during the covered period or alternative payroll covered period, including bank account statements or third-party payroll services provider report documenting the amount of cash compensation paid to employees, tax forms for the periods that overlap the covered period or alternative covered period, such as Form 941, and state quarterly business and individual employee wage reporting and unemployment insurance tax filings. Payment receipts, canceled checks, or account statements showing employer contributions to employee health insurance and retirement plans. This is not applicable to self-employed individuals with no employees. Copies of current lease agreement, utility invoices, lender amortization schedule, and receipts of payment for each as applicable to support non-payroll costs. Also, borrowers must maintain all PPP loan documents for 6 years after the loan is forgiven or repaid in full. Borrowers can apply for forgiveness any time on or before the maturity date of the loan, including before the end of the covered period if they have used all the loan proceeds for which they're requesting forgiveness. Borrowers must apply for forgiveness within 10 months of the last day of the covered period to receive deferment of loan payments. If you have specific questions about your applications, you should speak with your lender, attorney, or tax advisor.